Hello and welcome to lesson 26 in this Chess Beginner to Winner series. And today I'll be talking about opening systems. So I had a comment by a viewer recently talking about how they have trouble with openings. And if you watched my most recent video in the Quest for 2000 series, day 30, oh, was it 39? Whatever I just put out, it was a disaster in the opening. So I'm trying to learn these new openings, and I had trouble with that one. It was a Ruy Lopez. So if you are a beginner, and especially if you don't want to, or don't have time to memorize a lot of different openings and all the theory behind it, that can take a long time. And most of the games when you're starting out will be decided in the middle game and the end game. Now, you could have a horrible opening and lose in the opening, of course, but there is a shortcut that you can take that'll help out when it comes to openings. And you can use opening systems. And what I mean by that, you probably heard of the London system. So white would start out with d4, and then kind of wait to see what their opponent does. So let's say the opponent plays d5. Well, then they might bring out this bishop immediately, or their knight first and then the bishop. So maybe their opponent plays this to wait and see what they do, and now they might play e3, and then if they play e6, knight to f3, something like this setup, and you'll probably bring your bishop to e2 or d3, but you're trying for an opening system, and it's possible even to play this with black as well. Now, you probably normally wouldn't do that, but if you're trying to cut down on the time it takes that you're studying, and you don't, if you are busy, most people are busy, don't have a lot of time to practice these openings and go over all the different moves. You can cut back on a lot of your study time by using a system. So the London system is not bad. Let me go back to the beginning here. Something that Bobby Fischer used to do, he would play the King's Indian defense with black, and then he would sort of play it with white. He would use the King's Indian attack, and it was the same kind of setup. So I'll show you that real quick, and that's one way. You can either pick a different system for white and black, or you could even use the same system for both sides of the board. So if somebody plays d4, and then you play knight to f6, and then they play c4, well, you can play g6 here and go for the King's Indian defense. So here they'll normally play this to be able to bring this e-pawn up, and black will continue developing their bishop. So one benefit of this King's Indian defense is that you get to castle quickly, get your king to safety, get it out of the center, get your rook developed. So you develop your king side, get castle to safety quickly. Now, one downside is that white gains a lot of territory. So they normally play e4. So they have all three of these pawns here. And they could sometimes even bring another pawn up here and just control a lot of space in the center. So now this pawn is also threatening the knight. So normally they will take time to play this move. That way, if the pawn pushes forward to attack the knight, you can capture, and it breaks apart white's center. And so if this game were to continue on, it looks like the most played move is knight to f3, And now black can go ahead and castle here. And so both sides would continue development. But if we look at this system, the King's Indian defense allows you to castle quickly, get some pieces developed on the king side. Now here, by moving this d6 pawn, in the game you'll have an option later. Let's say white plays the most played move, bishop to e2. Well, now black has to decide whether to play c5, which is, what is that, the fifth most common move, or the most common move is e5 here. So e5 is normally played. Now there are other options, of course, but if we look at this, now white normally just castles here, and then looks like knight to c6 is played. But anyway, with the King's Indian defense, black will be a little bit more cramped. And so he wants to try and exchange off some pieces. Now he is counterattacking in the center. He lets white build up this big, strong center, and he then normally pushes the e pawn or the c pawn and starts attacking the center. Now here he could play knight to c6, threatening this pawn in the center. He could even play, it looks like knight to a6 is the second most played move, which would maybe allow you to push this c pawn and then reposition the knight back towards the center. And the third most common move is just to capture in the center here. And so now, if we take a look at this, we see this setup, what white has done here, or excuse me, what black has played. And now we'll flip the board and play it from the white side of the board. So let's say they start off with this move, and it looks like knight to f6 is the most common. Well, now the second most common move is this, and it looks like they normally copy here. So bishop develops, castle. So now it's kind of like a King's Indian defense, but this is the King's Indian attack. And so it's played from the white side. And now black normally castles here. And white has different options. They could play d3 and continue on like the King's Indian. Normally, it looks like d5 is the most common move. And now white has to make a decision. They just develop their knight here. They could play c3. But anyway, you have different options. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can pick an opening system, and if you just don't like studying openings, or you're busy, you don't have the time, you can pick an opening system that you can use for white or black. And that can cut down on a lot of time. And also, by starting out with the same opening, some people might think, well, that could be boring, but it can save you a lot of time. You just practice over and over again with your same opening. And of course, in the future, you can switch to a different opening, but you could stick with one of these opening systems and just use it for a long time and learn all the details and what to do and what not to do, because you'll get a lot more experience in that opening than most of your opponents, because you're playing that one opening over and over again, whereas your opponent might be trying to pick theoretically better openings, but they have so many other variations to watch out for in many different openings. So this can basically save you a lot of time. And something else that I play with white and black is, now this is usually something I'll play in blitz games for fun, but the hippopotamus defense or system. So basically white can try and fianchetto both bishops. Now, normally it's a black system, something black would play, but white can play it as well. So you play something like this. E5 is the most common. Then you just develop, fianchetto the bishop, and you're aimed up towards the king side. Now it looks like knight to c6 is played most often because you're attacking this pawn. And here, the most common move is e3, but with the hippopotamus system or hippo defense, you basically play g3 here and get ready to fianchetto the other bishop. So now they'll normally take control of the center, but then you just go ahead and develop your other bishop, and now they just develop their knight. And if we play this out, let's see, d3 is played most often, then bishop to c5, now e3, then black can go ahead and castle. And now you want to bring your knights up here behind these pawns. So knight to e2 is played most often. And now rook to e8, just helping to fortify this central pawn, lining up on the king. Now the other knight is brought in. And here looks like a5 is the most often played move. Or bishop to f5. But let's say they do this. Well, now you can play a3, because if they keep pushing this pawn forward, well, now you can just push your pawn and chase their bishop away. So now it looks like bishop to f5 is most common, and h3 can be played. And so this keeps the knight, it keeps pieces away from this g4 square, and you could potentially push forward, chasing the bishop away, gaining time. So it looks like most often played is queen to d7. So here you have to be careful that you don't castle, and then they can snatch up this pawn here with this battery of queen and bishop. And if you castled, the rook would no longer be helping the bishop protect this. So here, let's see, it looks like g4 was played in a game, and now the bishop retreats back. And now this knight can jump up here to g3 and help guard the king side. Keep an eye on a possible push of the h-pawn to try and break up these pawns. But the knight can also help control the center, and at some point maybe even jump up here to f5. But in the game, let's see here. Maybe I can take a look at this. Well, I'll just keep playing this game out for a little bit further. So h6, giving this bishop room to escape possibly. And now castling. And here we have an interesting move, rook to a6. So I'm just playing this game, the one game that's listed here. So now, what do they do? Knight to f3, kind of funneling the pieces over towards the king side. Bishop to h7 in case that knight tries to attack the bishop. And now knight to h4, getting ready to jump up here maybe. Probably waiting to see what black will do, or trying to entice black to push a pawn forward to chase this knight. So now knight to d8 to reposition this knight, and b4 here. So this is interesting. Capture, 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 rook captures, capture, and then queen to a1. So going after this pawn, queen to e6 to protect, and No, it looks like the game maybe ended here. But anyway, you get the picture. So if we go back, let me go to something like, oh wait, that's wrong. Wanted to hit, oh, it's not letting me. Okay, anyway, we'll show you the this hippo defense, or hippopotamus defense. So you get a system like this where all these pawns are helping control a lot of squares on the fourth rank. You're a little more cramped, but everything's pretty solid and it's hard to break through in here. So you can also play this with black. So if we reset and we look at it from the black side, so most commonly played is e4. Well, what if you play this? They're going to grab the center. You attack this pawn. They're normally going to protect. So this is the most commonly played move, it looks like. And now you fianchetto this other one. The knight moves up here to protect this central pawn. You continue. And now, let's see. Castling is most common. And d6. So you start moving your central pawns. White lines the rook up on the king. And you can bring the other pawn up. And now, looks like that's the most common move, followed by this. Knight to f1, maybe getting ready to reposition to the king side. Knight to e7. Knight to g3. h6. And here c3 to limit the scope of this bishop here and protect this d pawn. And now a6 to keep any troublesome bishop pins maybe, although it wouldn't do too much. But they were going for this setup here, this hippo defense, where you fianchetto both bishops, you bring the central pawns up one square and put the knights in behind them, and you bring up the a pawn and the h pawn to keep pieces away from g5 and b5 here. And then what is played here most often, they just develop, and now you have, let's see, the knight moving up here, h3 to keep this knight out of g4. Now castling, queen goes up here to target this, the king protects, rook at a to d1, kind of lining up on the queen here. Queen to d7, connecting the rooks. And now, let's see. Interesting. Bishop to b1. And this was played by Levon Aronian versus Luke McShane. So, high-level chess, grandmasters here. So, let's see. Now b5. Knight to h2, maybe getting ready to jump up here and attack this knight. Knight at f to g8 to let this f pawn come down possibly. h4, f5, h5 trying to generate some attack here. g5, capture, capture, and f4, g4. Anyway, you get the picture. The game ended in a draw, but that just shows you how you can set up that system from both sides. Another system opening for white is the Kali system. So you start out with d4, and then if they play d5, well, let's see what was the most common move. Looks like knight to f6 is most common. So I'll pick the most common moves. Knight to f6. Now you bring up the knight to f3. And it looks like g6 is most common. you'll probably at a beginner level see a lot of d5 being played. So you bring up, I'll just play the most commonly played moves here. Now they're saying c4, but if you're trying to set up the Kali system, you'll normally play e3 here. They'll just go ahead and fianchetto the bishop. And now you're going for d3 to help control this square. So they just go ahead and castle. You can go ahead and castle, or you can go for this. So this is the Kali system set up right here. It basically helps fortify this e4 square. And you bring one knight up here to f3, and the other one backs it up from d2. So if this knight has to move forward, the other knight could possibly jump in here, and this knight keeps an eye on the e4 square to keep this knight from jumping in there, which you see sometimes if d5 had been played. So it looks like d6 is most common. Now white will castle. The other knight is developed. And now you have options here. You could play the normal Kali system with c3, and another option is to play b3 and fianchetto this bishop over here, because this is a bad bishop blocked in behind its own pawns. And if you move the bishop to b2, it can line up through the center and aim at the king side. But it looks like c3 is played a little more often. And now, let's see, e5. And so this is another good reason to have the knight here and the bishop guarding this e4 square to prevent a push of this pawn, threatening to fork here. So if there was a rook here, that could be a serious threat. So now, at this point, you would just have to decide how you want to play. It looks like e4 is most common, gaining space in the center, but rook to e1 can be played, or queen to c2, creating a battery here. Although when they play the King's Indian defense, this g-pawn kind of blocks the scope of the bishop. So as you would play this Kali system against different styles by your opponent, you could practice, and you would be playing the same opening, and you would just have to figure out what to play against their different responses. But the more you play it, the more you would get a feel for this opening system. And I guess we could take a look and see if it's possible to play it from the black side. So if somebody played e4, well, you probably don't want to play d5, or they'll just capture here. So here you would have to, I don't know, maybe play something like this, like a Caro-Kann style setup. And they're probably going to play that. Well, now, I don't know. It might be more difficult to play this. Looks like e5 is most common. And already you can't set up your system that you were trying to go for, because this pawn is far advanced here. So that's something you would have to work out and see how you would have to vary your opening moves depending on what your opponent did. So if we go back, let's say they played this. Well, now it might be a little bit more easy to try and set this up. So, if they play c4, you could play e6, kind of a queen's gambit style. And then if they play here, you could go like this, and you're trying to possibly set up your Kali system with the black pieces, but of course it's a different opening. The Queen's Gambit declined, semi-Slav defense. So now their most common move is this. Well, you could go ahead and play that. And let's see here. Knight to f3 is their most common move. And now you could jump into here, and next you could possibly put that bishop here. So looks like queen to c2 is played most often. And now you have the reverse Kali system, basically, which is called the semi-Slav defense, mainline Stoltz variation, it looks like, according to this. So this just shows you how you can kind of test those move orders from both sides of the board and see if you could set them up with both sides. So we could go back and see if you could try and set up the reverse London system. So if they play that and you play this, and now it looks like c4 is played most often. Well, now it might be a problem trying to get this bishop out if you played e6. So you could try that. And then looks like knight to f3 is most common. Knight to f6. Knight to c3. And maybe you could try this move now, although they could try and attack it, the same as one of the options in the London system with white. So here it looks like most often played is capture, capture, queen to b3, which can cause a problem because now this is unprotected. And it looks like this is played most often. And now we have capture. Looks like queen capture is possible. Or just capturing here. Queen captures. And I don't know if I would be too happy with this. Black is down a piece here. So this, and it looks like white usually comes out ahead. So these are the kind of things you would have to figure out as you're trying different opening systems. You would have to see if it's even possible to play the system from both sides. And if you decide that you can play it, well, then you would have to just practice with different variations depending on what your opponent does. But by picking a system, you would be able to practice that same opening, and especially if you do it from the white side and the black side, you could just try it again and again, and see what your opponents, how they respond, and that would help you formulate a plan. And that could save you a lot of time in studying openings, because you just study one opening, and if you're using it for black and white, you're just studying that same opening and using some of the same principles for both sides. And now, one other possibility is some people that play the Sicilian defense like this, e4, c5, and then most often played as knight to f3, d6, d4, and so on. Well, we could see if that can be played. If you're playing it, the Sicilian with black, can it be played from the white side? Well, now if you push this pawn, this would be the English opening. And so, you have to watch out, because this could be, quite a bit more complicated. This is one of the most common moves, the second most common move. And now you kind of have a reversed Sicilian setup, where white is playing the Sicilian, basically. And let's see, the most common move is knight to c3. That is a common move in the Sicilian. d3 is a little bit lower down. But anyway, something like this. Then if they go here, looks like knight to f3 is the most common move, and then they could chase that away, I guess. You could play this to prevent that pawn from moving forward. And now, if they play d5, you capture. they capture, and you kind of have a reversed Sicilian going on here. So you attack, they protect, and then now white would have to decide what to do. So there are many different ways that you could try out an opening system, and you can save even more time by trying to use the opening system for the white and the black side. Now, why don't chess masters do that more often? Well, because doing that, you don't necessarily pick the best openings all the time. So grandmasters and chess masters, they're trying to find the very best openings that they can play to get some kind of advantage in the opening if that's possible. And especially if they're playing high level opponents, they want to pick the best moves. So, if you have more time to study the opening and opening theory, well, then yes, you can try and study a bunch of different openings, but it takes a while. It takes a lot longer to get those openings down. As I'm learning, I'm doing a new opening repertoire in this my other video series, The Quest for 2000, where I picked a whole new, or basically new, set of openings that I'm trying, and so I'm still learning them and improving on them. So that's going to take a while, at least a few more months of playing to just keep working out the wrinkles in my opening system. As I kind of got destroyed in a recent game because I made one inaccurate move in the opening and it led to some problems. So that's something else that chess masters are doing. They pick sharp openings where one bad move can lead to a problem and potentially cost the game. But if you're playing an opening system, especially if your opponent is not familiar with it, you may not be picking the best moves, but you're playing something that you're more familiar with than your opponent, and that could give you an advantage, especially at lower levels when the game's usually decided in the middle game and the end game a lot of times. All right, well, I'll end the video there for today because there's so many different openings that I could go into and different opening systems. You can just try and figure out which one you would like to play and maybe play it for white and the black side of the board. And feel free to leave any comments if you are trying a particular opening system and you think it's worth mentioning. I'd be interested to hear what systems you all are trying out there, and maybe we could do a future video on a specific opening system and dig more in depth into it. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe for those that haven't to help support the channel. And feel free to, like I said, to leave comments, suggestions, or even requests for future videos and chess material. Thank you all for watching and have a super chess day.